Hi, it's Dr. Silva, and today I'm going to talk about mindfulness. The concept of mindfulness from the perspective of obsessive-compulsive disorder or anxiety disorders in general. And I think that even people that don't have OCD can relate to this. We all kind of do it as human beings, but persons with anxiety spectrum disorders, they are plagued by it. And a lot of times they don't even realize it. A lot of times people just they need to point it out. When I describe this phenomenon, the symptoms that are not mindfulness, the opposite of mindfulness, patients often will have this light bulb moment where they're somewhat in awe of, yeah, that's what I do all the time. And so they're not even aware of it. It's because the people that are really suffering from anxiety that need medications, because those individuals, they've been doing it their whole lives. And so it seems a natural thing, but we all do it, which is not being mindful. And that's the underbelly of anxiety. When you're riddled with anxiety, whether you have a lifelong anxiety disorder that you inherited from your parent, and by the way, anxiety disorders are the most genetic of all of the psychiatric syndromes. There's always a first-degree relative, mom or dad. Always. It never skips a generation. And when I see it, when I see generalized anxiety disorder or panic disorder or OCD, I ask the patient, okay, so who'd you get it from, mom or dad? I don't ask if one of the parents have had this syndrome. I know that they have. And if they tell me no, there's one of two things. Either the diagnosis is wrong or they're not recognizing it in their parent. But a lot of times they give me an answer like that. Mom, no, hands down. Dad, hands down. Or they think about it for a little bit and then they say, no, it's got to be mom, because dad's pretty laid back, but mom worries all the time and she's always warning you about the worst case scenario and she's very cautious. It is a spectrum of severity. But let me talk about mindfulness. So mindfulness is being present, being in the moment that is occurring right now, and not being in your head. Because when you're in your head, when you're thinking about something, and particularly when you're fraught with anxiety, when you're worrying about something, then not only are you not, but you're not in reality. Whatever it is, whether you're dwelling, whether you're thinking about something that's already happened, that has a hold of you, and it could take the form of intense regret if it's something that was a long time ago that keeps resurfacing in an obsessive manner. You don't have to have OCD to obsess. Or whether it's something that occurred very recently that you can't get out of your head, that you're traumatized by. You keep reliving it. There's this morbid preoccupation with it. Even though it's distressing you, you replay it over and over in your mind, the embarrassment that you experienced or the disappointment or the shock or how awful it was, and you keep voluntarily reliving it. Or anticipatory anxiety, and that's probably more common, worrying about something that hasn't happened yet and that may not happen and that in fact usually doesn't happen. Because you're so worried and because you're catastrophizing and you're imagining the worst case scenario, in an effort to prepare for it, you're imagining something that may never come to pass, but you're suffering through it as though it were happening. And that's the terrible irony. And Michael J. Fox said, to worry about something that hasn't happened, there's no utility in it, because if it never happens, you worried for nothing. And if it does happen, then you suffer twice. What it is the person's desire to control it by planning for it. But really, all of that worry and anxiety, the worrying, it's an illusion that we feel that by worrying, we're doing something. And we're really not doing anything. We're really not affecting the outcome. We're not affecting whether or not that thing is likely to occur or not. Whatever the dominoes are that may or may not lead to that worst case scenario, that terrible outcome that you're worrying about it is not going to affect that in the least. And it is an illusion. It's just the symptom of anxiety asserting itself, insisting it's your brain. And if it's genetic, if it is endogenous, and we don't really understand the exact pathophysiology, but it has something to do with serotonin. It has something to do with serotonergic neurotransmission and the inadequacy of that in certain areas of the brain. And because when we increase the availability and the actions of serotonin with medication, then those symptoms quiet down. And so That's where we get that hypothesis that there's something wrong with serotonin. What do we do when we're not being mindful? When we're not attending to the present moment, which is really the way we should all live our lives, because really it's the only thing that exists. The past is non-existent. It doesn't exist anymore. And you could argue that maybe it never did. Maybe it's just an illusion, but it's not happening now. And so it's gone. And the future hasn't happened yet. So it doesn't exist either. It's just a figment of your imagination. Really, they both are. And they have no currency. The only thing that is the now. And every moment of our lives that we spend not attending to the present moment is a waste. Now, I'm not going to say that reminiscing isn't a nice thing. That if you have a touch of nostalgia and you're thinking about something that's not tormenting you, that it's not necessarily a waste of time to think about bygone days or our loved ones who have passed. I'm not saying don't look at your life, what has happened, and derive some sort of peace from it, some sort of joy. That's fine. But even doing that a whole lot, and you're missing out on what's going on right now. And that's so true for most of us. We're so preoccupied with our stressors, and we get upset about traffic or whatever it is, that we forget ourselves and we forget the moment, the miraculous moment that is and that we are a part of. And we become inured to our own existence, and we forget how miraculous it is that we're even here, that we're even aware. And we get wrapped up in details, we get wrapped up in our heads, and we tend to live in somewhere else, in some alternate reality that's usually in the future, a lot of times in the past for those who dwell, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's just all your imagination. You might as well be dreaming. And a lot of times you can see that they're lost in thought, but especially when there's anxiety. Especially when there's anxiety, because anxiety compels the brain to take itself into a terrible situation, whether it happened or it could happen, and to live there and dwell there. And it's really quite psychotic when you really look at it. So bringing yourself back into the present moment is an exercise that I always give to my anxious patients. Now, the ones that need medication, they need medication. They can't do it without medication. That's the nature of obsessions, is they're involuntary. They're not only unbidden, but they're involuntary. So you can't just tell yourself, don't worry. You can't tell somebody who has endogenous anxiety, just don't worry about it. Well, that's what they're telling themselves. That's what worrying is. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Yeah, I'll do this or I'll do that, or maybe this or maybe that. And they're worrying, and it's constant. And they can tell themselves all day long not to worry. So sometimes you need medication, and sometimes you just can't. You banish a thought, and you try to concentrate on what's happening, and the thought creeps back in. When there's not enough serotonin, when you're obsessing, and you can't not worry about it. And you can't not worry about something that's not even happening. It's not even happening. There's a great book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now, and I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful book. It's a philosophical, spiritual tome that I think has just a lot of wisdom in it. Now is the only thing that exists, and so I think it's real, and it's what you should be honoring. And that every moment that you spend in the future and the past, whatever your reasons for dwelling in some figment of your imagination, you're dishonoring the now. The now is the only thing that's real. It's the only thing that exists. And I'm going to get a little deep here. My philosophical bent, I believe in infinity. I'm not going to use the word eternity because that has some connotations that people might object to. And I'm not trying to make any statement about the afterlife or about organized religion or anything like that. I just believe cosmologically that infinity exists and that we are immersed in it. Now, obviously, this little fishbowl of space-time that's 13.6 billion years old that we're trapped in, obviously there's a constraint there, but it's a fishbowl. There's something that's much greater, a much greater context that we can't even really conceptualize. And in my mind, that context that contains the universe or the multiverse and all these ribbons of space-time, is infinite. It is timeless and boundless. It's not physical space-time. It's something that we're not familiar with. If we are surrounded by infinity, something infinite, something boundless that has no start and has no finish, unlike the universe. If we are part of something that's infinite, it just makes sense to me, because the now is infinite. When you think about it, it's always now. No matter how long or short our lives are, no matter how long the Earth has been here, or the solar system, or the galaxy, or the universe, no matter what the measuring stick is, it's always now. It was now 13.6 billion years ago when the universe unfurled, and whenever it burns out and all the stars are dead and it's dark and cold, it will also be now. It will never be yesterday. It will never be tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. It's the ever-present now that's constantly changing and morphing. And maybe the fact that the eternal now is changing all the time gives us the illusion of time, like a tracer, like when you're on drugs and you see after images. Maybe that's why the past looks linear and looks like there's a story there. And of course the future is completely invisible because they don't exist. Because the past, which we can kind of see in our mind's eye, is really the ever-present, eternal, infinite, ever-changing present. It's always now. In every corner of the universe, in every corner of the multiverse, and then beyond, where there are no corners. You're missing it if you are wrapped up in your mind about worrying about something that's not happening. We all are guilty of getting wrapped up in our minds about things that aren't happening. And so being mindful means catching yourself when you're doing that and stopping and resisting. And if you can't resist, talk to a psychiatrist. You probably need medication. But being well rested and exercising and eating well, all of those things can help. And praying or meditating or contemplating or whatever you do to center yourself, to quiet your mind, which you should do at least once a day, preferably in the morning, maybe over a cup of coffee or whatever your morning ritual is, maybe in the shower, under the hot water, and to be mindful and to feel the hot water or to smell the coffee and to just be in the moment that is right there in front of you. Nothing else has currency. Nothing else matters. And if those other things are frightful, if they're torturing you, if they're morbid, if that's what your mind wants to do, put a boundary on that. And it's like biting your nails. Tell yourself to stop. Tell your mind to stop. And move away from something that lives in the past or the future, which are just constructs. They're mental constructs. They really don't exist. Even speaking non-philosophically, non-spiritually, just in terms of physics. Show me. Show me yesterday. No, yesterday isn't here. We can go back to the house that you grew up in. Maybe the house is still there. But what you'll see is a house that has changed. What you see is the house in the now. It's not the same house that was 30 years ago because the weather and the wind and it's been eroded. It's entropy has changed it. And maybe it's been remodeled. And there are other people living in it. And there's a totally different energy in terms of the psyches that occupy that space, the family that lives there now. Maybe it's very different, but it's still now. It was now in 1972, it's now, and it will be now in 2072. We're not mindful most of the time. We don't live in the now. And especially when you're driving, when you're in the shower, or similar activities, we're not attending to what's going on. We're thinking about the day, as we, instead of feeling the hot water, smelling the soap, and attending to what's going on right there in that moment. One practice is mindful eating. How many times do we eat while we're multitasking, we're reading something, watching television, the popcorn, and it's so mindless. Instead, you'll enjoy the meal so much more if you just don't do anything. Put your phone down and look at the food. Smell the food, taste it, savor every bite. Try that exercise next time that you eat. It's very pleasant. It's not like meditation. It's very frustrating because you're trying to focus on your breath and you're bored and you're having these random thoughts and you're distracted and your back hurts. You can be mindful during an activity like breakfast or taking your shower or even getting into bed. And this can help with insomnia because you're thinking about the pillow and how soft it is and how tired you are and how cool the room is. You're not thinking about the day you just had. You're not thinking about all the stuff you're going to do tomorrow because that's going to keep you awake, because those things are stressful. And even if you're not sweating bullets stressing about the next day, you're not going to be relaxed enough to fall asleep, because you're thinking about stuff that has no currency. If you focus on what's going on right now, you'll find, even if you're really stressed out and there's something you're really worried about and it's like you're dreading it, it's looming in the future and there's this monster that might come and get you, but the now is okay. Even if you're in the middle of bankruptcy, even if you're in the middle of someone's blackmailing you or something really horrible is happening, someone's dying even that you love, if you bring yourself into the present moment, you'll see that right now, nothing's on fire. When you are beside yourself with worry, if you can just bring yourself into the present moment, look around and notice things are still, things are quiet, there's a nice breeze, there's a beautiful sky, and get out of that mind that is experiencing a symptom, that mind that is sick in that moment. And you don't have to have a diagnosis of OCD. You can just be the run-of-the-mill person and whatever, you're sleep deprived, or maybe you've been drinking too much alcohol and you are at risk of getting fired and you do have something concrete to worry about, but you're just a mess and your mind wants you to be a mess and it wants you to suffer and it wants you to be for hours pacing the floor. When it would be a much better idea to fix yourself a cup of tea, sit down, and quiet your mind. And if you immerse yourself in the now, your mind will quiet, because the now is eternal and it doesn't really care about your little problems. All it cares about is existence. And if we were all Zen masters, that's all we would care about. Because that's the most precious thing, the most important thing, is the fact that I am. And not the I part, not the ego part, just the am part. Honor the now, and you'll get so much more out of life. And there'll be so much less stress. And you won't suffer twice, and you won't suffer needlessly. It feels like it's true, and the feeling is overwhelming. You can't argue with a feeling. Feelings always win. Almost always, unless you have the enlightenment to know that, well, no, this thought that I'm having because I'm feeling a certain way, this thought is not rational. And it's not serving me, even if it is logical. So I want to dispense with it, but I can't really dispense with it if the fire that's causing it, that's giving it validity, is still raging. So sometimes you have to attend to your emotions before you can redirect your thoughts. Redirecting thoughts is a good idea. Even better is to banish them altogether. Of course, we can't function as human beings in this world without thoughts, but the goal of meditation is to be so calm that you don't have to think about anything other than just feeling your presence, feeling the fact that you are alive, that you're here. And here is the only place there is, and it is infinite. It's always been here, always will be here. And if you can get in touch with that, I've never achieved it. There are people who have described it. There are people who have taken certain psychedelic substances, mushrooms and whatnot, who have experienced it. But I think it is our true nature. We can come into into contact with our true nature if we can do that, if we can escape the frontal lobe and all those thoughts and the ego and our sense of self, and if we can escape that for a moment, then we can be suspended in this eternal moment that we are, in fact, I believe, eternally suspended.